Welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. Our internet's a little weird today from this side,
I'll show you the divide in our
but we don't exactly know how bad it will get, so there might be chances we'll have to restart the stream and some chances there'll be a little more lag than usual. This is another week of Win 10 Battle Lounge matches, which usually means we don't need to put character select off, and we don't have any specific reason to do that this week. So we're gonna be playing full on, basically as much as we've been working on and everything we've been practicing, hopefully getting something out of that. Testing against whoever's willing to come in and try to get their 10 Battle Lounge wins in their various ways. While we're not discouraging joiners this week, we expect the lounge to fill up pretty quick. And even if we manage to defeat the people that do join, we expect to see the same sort of rotations. So, if you do want to join us, assume that this is a US East Coast or somewhere around the Atlantic Rim Battle Lounge. It is 3 rounds first to 2 with character select off today. And we're not necessarily going to be talking a lot about any specific thing. Tends to be a little adaptive because stronger players tend to join and stay for longer when their goal is just to, you know, find someone who isn't terribly uninteresting to fight, but that they think they could get through quickly. And a full lounge, as long as the Battle Lounge leader isn't too salty, is often a good place to get those 10 wins because you will, every match counts, so you get 5, you get basically 2 for every time you win, period. So you only have to beat 5 people basically. And you don't have to worry about them being a problem or them shifting out too early or whatever. Unfortunately, I can't be absolutely sure that this player isn't suffering from our internet not being best. That said, their play style and flow doesn't give me the impression that too much of what's going wrong here from their side is directly related to that problem. But we do still have the, as I said, being very serious, so in this case, Kazuki probably should have accepted that she'd won that match already and not gone in quite as hard, because in those situations your opponent is already on the defensive, and most characters in this game are simply not able to, especially not against a character like Akuma, they're simply not able to go, well, I'm going to use offense now, raw offense, because you're not going to be prepared. Raw offense is just not easy enough against Shoto's, but she seems to be in her rhythm today in lots of ways. Landing a lot more confirms than is completely standard. And a lot of awareness that makes it a little bit easier, but if we're back to the same situation now, the match is technically already won. Even if it doesn't look that way at first, you have to consider that you do often have some way around it, and your opponent is the one under the strain. This isn't always true, but it does come up a lot when they don't have enough ways to beat you with their meter, or when their character doesn't have a strong advantage of a particular kind. You get those sorts of situations popping up a lot. It's also good for keeping you just generally calmer about everything. next layer to that is, of course, learning to stand your ground, understanding all of the principles of corner guard, especially against Akuma, who is a character who is generally fairly easy to corner guard. Despite having a lot of good tools for getting out of neutral, not having to play through all of neutral, he's not the greatest for that sort of play style. But it looks like they've stopped. Maybe the lag was insufficient, was too much for them after all. So I guess onward. Yeah, unless they're probably departing. And why Godfist? Now this is going to be rough. Not necessarily because of a lack of experience here. In fact, Fangbot is one of the main bots that Kansuki Dynasty uses to practice. It's mainly that Fang makes her break a lot of the, let's say, rules that she normally plays by, and involves a lot of psychological shifting. Because Fang is a character that has to be fought from the perspective that you can't beat him quickly. He makes it impossible. Every time you feel as if, well, I have a chance to play offense, I have a chance to move fast, you should assume that you're wrong. She's been getting used to this more relative to Seth, but it can be hard when you're just starting out in this game to get really into the feeling that, yes, attrition, there is a match where the entire thing is attrition. And attrition is important because of the type of awareness that's required to get you through it. You can't constantly play at full throttle because you'll tire yourself out before you actually get to defeating your opponent. And this is where Fang really gets strong, because you have to often reset the situation and backdash out of bad situations altogether, but still have that moment that we're trained in our Kata 30 series where you backdash, but the backdash was not one where you've let your guard down. You are supposed to be watching because your opponent has an option. You're not backdashing in neutral, you're backdashing out of a situation, and your opponent can recognize this backdash is going to happen. The twitchier Fang makes you, the more likely you are to die, simply because Fang has so many unconventional options and moves that the times you are used to needing to challenge are not the times you get to do anything. If you play it against ninja characters in other games other than Dead or Alive, this comes up a lot. But you really can't say that Fang is particularly similar to Zeku in that regard. It's more so that Fang is not often trying to hit you the same way that other characters are trying to get this straightforward attack going. Fang doesn't need to do this. In fact, particularly if you've managed to get poisoned, Fang stops caring about this, or at least can stop caring about this entirely for quite a long period of time. Meaning that often you have to be just as unconventional in your own flow. And therefore, sometimes in your defense.
Round 2. Fight.
One of the bigger problems that comes up is that it's very hard to understand for most people how to hit Fang, particularly because he is a character you can in fact play footsies with, but you don't generally tend to feel like you can. Most characters fight Fang in footsies using a combination of their max range medium punches and their standing kicks. Karine is no exception, but the issue for Karine is usually if Fang has forced her to block at any point, those moves stop working.
You lose.
Our current situation means that it's more likely we'll keep on talking about the matchups. You can generally expect this. This was the plan. A stronger player, often of unfamiliar character, pops up, and we end up talking about what they do until the situation changes. They lose or decide that they don't want to fight anymore.
Round one. Fight!
Wolf has no access to a Fang bot as far as I remember. Fang bot is not terribly difficult to input, but if you're not used to the little bits, it's very timing intensive, so Fang bot can be kind of poorly input sometimes if you don't know the timing. I don't believe that Wolf has a Fang bot. Fortunately, Necalli as a character doesn't care as much about what Fang does as many other characters do, with a lot of tools for dealing with Fang's movement relative to others. But just like Karine, it's going to be really important to find that timing for that backdash. Because the more or less same rules apply. If Fang has made you block, Fang has control. With superior reach, poison that is usually placed somewhere on the screen, the ability to do some really powerful cross-ups, and outright evasions, you really have to choose your backdash timing. Fortunately, Fang isn't a great conversion from backdash damage character. Basically, Fang can absolutely hit you for backdashing, but it's risky to do so, and doesn't tend to end up being rewarding even if. Another useful thing is that many of Fang's attacks, particularly the longer ones, end up somehow just within range of being grabbed by Necalli's EX command grab. Sometimes I wonder about the range on that move because I thought it was almost the same and yet the EX one works and the others don't.
Round one.
But people who have put much more effort into understanding Necalli's command grab than I could probably clear that up quite quickly. The main thing to understand is you have that option somewhere in there. A lot of your defensive situations where you think Fang is going to do something, because Fang is not a character that spends a lot of time walking backward in the standard sense. More likely he'll keep on hitting more buttons or try to do something specific. And that is a very good use of meter in this matchup as a generality. definitely a character that, if you let him pressure you enough, a lot of players who are not as familiar with things will just take advantage of this. They'll just keep on hitting the buttons because you're letting them. But if you have any invincible moves to get through Fang stuff with, it's often helpful. The reason this isn't really devastating is because while many characters do have options that have invincible hits, Fang can actually attack you and end pressure strings from so far away that your invincible move won't necessarily reach. However, Ken and Necalli definitely don't have this problem. Necalli can at least land the Rising Light, and Super is another good option in the same space.
Necalli wins.
This is, however, a big risk when you're doing these things, because if for whatever reason the Fang player decided to stop, there are some slight pauses in their actions, in their combos, that allow them to bait you into doing this, and that is actually where Necalli's chance to land the command grab tends to come from. The capacity to, at nearly any time with meter, uppercut out of a situation on a character that can also command grab you. It's not a common combination. Sure, there are characters that can do things that are like uppercuts, but we're specifically talking about the type of attack where your opponent has pushed themselves out but are still hitting buttons, and you end up with something of, okay, I'm still hitting you.
Round 2. Fight.
From the other side, NY Godfist of the Waffle Iron Dojo seems to have a fairly good handle on this matchup, because unless the Necalli player is dominating you with the tools mentioned, there's not a lot of reason to do things different than what is Fang's normal game plan. You will notice, however, that there's much less use of both Nishikyu and Ryubenda compared to many characters, and that is to help maintain those spacings. You don't want Necalli jumping at you when you're unprepared. He does too much damage, he converts too well from it, he gets good knockdowns off of a lot of things that aren't necessarily full jump-ins, and he has enough reach to make certain things really annoying. So, continuing to play by hitting buttons and making Necalli players block for a long time can be really helpful. This is doubly useful once Necalli has actually used up, or rather activated V-Trigger, especially if you can get them to do it early, because then there's no V-Reversal to get you off, and Necalli has no way to return to a state in which V-Reversal is available.
Let's do this.
But let's see the adaptation that we get from our Fang player if Kansuki Dynasty starts to just hit more kicks in neutral. And the important thing about hitting the kicks in neutral is, firstly, to recognize that a lot of Fang's moves take a long time to start up, and while they are usually quite evasive, Karin's stand heavy kick is very swingy and will often hit Fang before anything else Fang does will actually do anything. It's not a move you can just use whenever, but it's a decent option, and various forms of raw light Mujin, raw EX Mujin help to move out of the positions that Fang normally feels safe in, as demonstrated there. Once you've managed to get these knockdowns and push Fang back using the Mujin Kaku and similar, it's much easier to change your position. Your goal shouldn't generally be to hit Fang, but to make him block your max range stand heavy kick and max range stand medium kick. Because once you've made him block something, now you have controlled the pushback. And this is enough to stop Fang's stronger advantage, namely hitting specific buttons in specific places basically forever, from coming to bear on Karine in general play. As you can see, Fang is already standing at a range so far out that his buttons no longer reach after a slight pushback from the opponent. In fact, we should now switch to talking about how to handle this from the Fang side, because there's not a lot of options you have here. The first one you've seen, immediate adaptation to the stand medium kick, which is in our Fang bot for precisely that reason. That's the best thing for Fang to do when facing this sort of player. But it's not enough by itself, at all. There's the second thing, also added, primary thing in Fang bot, because Fang bot was partially, tailored toward her. But that's not enough by itself either, because again, it causes you to change your entire flow. You can't keep up the same style of motion. The Sotoja does help, as does when you do get the pressure, not pushing too hard on it. But still, none of these things are in themselves solutions to your problem. So unless you want to master the instant jump medium kick, fuzzy overhead style thing, your better option as Fang in these situations is to go for the coward crouch into low kick, not because you will specifically get through everything Karine wants to do, but because you can push so hard on stressing her out because she must use different options to deal with them. There we go. Fang's relatively poor back and forward dashes don't help the situation either. So you can see here that really, both players are just looking to get the optimal pushback for themselves. Once they've got it, the other player has a really hard time dealing with situations without taking some relatively large risks. And that's mostly the matchup. You don't have to think too hard on either side, you just play footsies and understand what the footsies are that you're playing. And that's it. It's not necessarily too stressful either, it's hard sometimes. But not hard in a way that either player finds himself thinking, I'll never be able to do this, I can't win here. It's a little more difficult when Fang decides to retreat, but Karine is so good at closing distance compared to other characters when put into those situations by Fang that it's not really a this has shut me down sort of thing. There you have that carry. But there you go, that kick, because of its very strange properties in terms of how and when it hits, can really cause Karine to have difficulty moving around the screen properly. Ooh, the jump. And this time, the ES Mujin actually comes slightly too early.
Final round. Fight.
Good use of Sotoja. One thing that really helps Karine in this matchup is that both characters tend to get massive amounts of V-meter off each other. But Karine's benefit is that her V-trigger, this particular V-trigger, I don't know about the Ken honestly, but this V-trigger is a really good V-trigger for this matchup because Fang needs to hit buttons. And understanding when Fang players feel that need will get you through a lot. From the Fang side, you should generally adapt by using more Nishikyu once you see the move. Primarily because if she has it, if she has V-trigger active, there's a decent chance you could have done enough damage to get through. It's very critical from the Karine side that if you realize you have the life lead and you have your V-trigger available, chances are you want to activate this one. And if you don't use this V trigger, then chances are on the other side you want to V reversal your way out of any bad situation you see come up, because you can't afford to be stuck in Fang's loops, because you don't get the freedoms of how to use your kicks. That moment, for example, was unfortunately an opportunity to raw activate that didn't come through. You have to also consider the level of, let's say, caution that it forces the Fang player into. Just the stress of having to change your mindset towards, okay, I can't hit all my pressure strings, I'll get parried and die, is an additional level of complexity and thought that has to be added to flows. It's fortunate because Karin lacks the capacity to easily get Mayokins on top. From the Fang side, never do that, because that will happen 90% of the time. Anyone who can execute that on reaction, that's going to happen. Don't do it. Oh, perfect activation timing. But that was instant adaptation, and therefore the use of the anti-gem. So a quick run through on both sides. Again, I have no idea if this person's going to stick around much more, but that means they're at their 6th win. So we might get to see them for another 4. But no, it seems they're dropping to back at least. Not clear why, but... Which means we are going into the Nikali mirror, which I probably don't have much to say about, so you can consider that to be on break for the next match and possibly the match after that, given that the expectation was mostly that we get a bunch of people coming in. Sometimes it's just 2 or 1 or 2 though, because character select off does tend to limit what people are willing to do. But as noted, that's intentional. It's a good time to get more learning out of the experience, so for now I'll be saving my voice until more learning or discussion is to be done.
Round 1. Fight! Necalli wins. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Final round. Fight! Necalli wins. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Necalli wins. It's go time. Let's do this. Round one. Fight!
Now he's
You win. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Final round. Fight! You win! It's go time! Let's do this! Round one. Fight! Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Final round. Fight! You lose. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Final round. Fight!
Right there!
Let's do this. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Seth wins. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Seth wins.
Well, that was longer than I intended to be off mic, but the quick switch to Rashid.
It's go time.
And apparently no readiness from our Nikali. But this is along the same lines, usually, for our Karine. Even at relatively higher levels, fighting Rashid is a lot about understanding the willingness of the opponent to use the tornado, smaller fireball style tornado, use of max range heavy Mujin Gaku, because it stops a lot of Rashid's flow, and learning how and when to neutral jump and similar to get out of things, as well as understanding that you basically can't anti-air and should just bat dash everything. Understanding how to jump out of Rashid pressure, and understanding that because Rashid tends to move forward to do nearly everything, you can use a lot more of your own forward moving moves in neutral, simply because it's likely that you end up clipping Rashid with them. Doing so also makes you harder for Rashid to target, and clears up a lot of little bits of interaction that happen. Since Rashid as a character is generally not based on having moves that start super quickly and move forward that fast at the same time, it's difficult to properly punish max range heavy Mujin. Technically it's difficult to punish max range of all Mujin, but the heavy one is easier to space because you're not under pressure situation all the time. There you see the jump out, forward, jump out of Rashid pressure, comes up a lot. But the main thing missing here is the same thing that is always missing when one tries to play Rashid when you haven't done so in a long time and haven't fought Rashid bot. How to punish eagle spikes. Please remember to practice punishing your eagle spike. It's right there. This is simply because the opponent will simply use Eagle Spike if you don't show that you can punish it, because there's no downside to it. It's not a stupid thing to do. It's not the easiest move to punish, and Rashid doesn't tend to take a lot of damage when you land the punish from most characters anyway. So, if you haven't even indicated that you can do it, it just lets them play free, long-range, neutral sort of, without you really having any counters to the situation if you don't have a parry.
Fight.
Because unlike most rushing moves like that, you can't just jump out of it and expect to not get hit. Spacing there. The bigger problem when it comes to dynasty spacing now is again a matter of when do I activate my V-trigger, because it's fairly useful. There are definitely moments in this matchup where having that active at all changes a ton of Rashid's options, but then you have to spend a lot more time thinking about and looking for when to activate it. Fortunately, if you're not trying that hard to hit Rashid, it's fairly easy to tell what to do in this matchup. Most of the stressors in this match come entirely from the feeling, I need to hit this character. But Karine in this form doesn't really need to hit Rashid. She will eventually just win because she does a lot of damage, and has ways of getting to higher levels of meter without doing any real work. But you can see here that she has changed to focusing on hitting Rashid and lost the opportunity to activate the V-trigger a while back. Now, the situation is no longer in her favor because Rashid is now the one that managed to get V-triggered, managed to get corner carry. The situation shifted midway, so she can still get it, but now she has to use it offensively instead, which is way more stressful. And often results in it being used up without getting all of the benefits she gets. So, it's important to learn to focus on the game plan part of fighting and not the hitting people part of fighting. Unless you have a very pressury character, your main focus should almost never be on landing hits on your opponent, because the hits are often not rewarding enough to compensate for the large losses in cohesion that your game plan suffers because of it.
Let's do this. My iron. Round one. Fight.
While the Wolf does not necessarily play this matchup a lot, Zangief bot is one of our easier bots to input relative to a given person. It's also one of our most personalized bots as a generality. If your main character is known, unlike others where it's sometimes specifically, hey, input this bot a whole different way because of the game plan that your opponent is likely to use, this is more of a, there are things that are important to get right and things that are less important to get right depending on what character you play. And since it's difficult to get all of them right at the same time, in our Zangief bot, it's easy to just stop halfway and somewhat good to know, oh, I need to focus on this part more so and therefore don't care. This is a hard matchup for the Wolf specifically because it involves something that the Wolf doesn't strictly speaking like doing. It involves walking up to people and hitting medium punch in their faces. Particularly a problem because Zangief has better reach in the first place. But you can see that the Wolf tends to retreat more and try to set up situations first, whereas Zangief he's a powerhouse, he will just walk through everything. So you never get that option. He doesn't care about the stuff you're putting on. He just really wants to hit you. And given that one of the biggest things that changed Zangief play, which most people don't necessarily think about, from the days of games like Alpha 2 and Street Fighter Turbo, is that you can now input SPDs during dashes. It's not something people think about a lot, but it's really important. You could always do it somewhat during other moves if you knew the exact recovery time, but most of the time your opponent would block those other moves, so it didn't matter. Especially given the pushback in those games. But here now you have a character that is supposed to do a 360 motion. Some people can do it without jumping, not everyone. Some people can do it out of the recovery of a different move, just hit the up at the correct timing. That's really helpful, but you still have to train that sort of thing, and you often have to confirm different things to be sure that you got it right. Just being able to dash and do the move raw in neutral is very helpful. But we're continuing to watch the Wolf struggle with the basic part of this. I'm not sure that it's going to go well because it really is heavily required. This flow of this matchup, I don't think I've ever seen it at high level this way, and it's technically not meant to be played at mid-level this way. Technically, both these players should be trying to get into the position where their medium punch wins. Because while this is obviously still a match in which people are showing off specific intents and skills, and being constantly predictable isn't always the best thing. You do have to always consider that your opponent has bigger output than you in specific situations, and those situations change very fast. Which of these characters has the bigger potential for output at any given point is very shifty, but this means that you have to be constantly on guard for when that shift happens. Didn't reverse a lot of that one either, unfortunately. But at least the sweet punish for the lariat is there. And again. But no confirm on the crouch medium kick. Fortunately, it's really hard to get people with just... People who have too much Zangief bot experience are really hard to get with just raw bear grabs. So... we'll see if they continue to play it out this way. I haven't seen a single stand medium punch hit from the Zangief side either, so I probably don't have that much to say. There's nothing heavily analytical I can mention here. This is characters finding their spacing and doing good moves for the spacing. If you've fought enough Zangief bot, you will also know how to get through that. Yes, there is a through to that move.
Round 2. Fight.
You could think of it closer to a whiff punish though. Didn't drop that.
Zangief wins.
It can get a little rough when one insists on changing characters in character set off launches, but we don't have a problem with it.
Let's do this.
Generally, it's a little bit easier when you are the one winning. Assuming your opponent has respect for your win and does not boot you off by holding it. Here's one of the most fun matchups in this game, if you know how to fight it, and one of the least fun matchups in this game if you don't know how to fight it. From the Bison side, this match is entirely understanding that you can't control
Round 1.
Vega,
Fight.
and you need to use a lot of Inferno. You can't control Vega, and you can hardly ever hit Vega with your standard attacks. So knowing how I'm meant to anti-air, hitting the right cycle burst timings because you think neutral is coming, and then hitting Psycho Inferno basically all the rest of the time. Your goal is never to land the Psycho Inferno, it's to limit Vega's movement because there is so much wind up to Vega's movement that the Psycho Inferno just works. You can literally get away with doing the move because by the time the opponent has registered that you've done it, reacted to the fact that you've done it, and gone for an attack, it's exactly the same attack as they would have gotten if they had just been playing footsies. And that's interesting and important to think about. There's no difference. It's just certain matchups in this game where you gain an option because of the properties of your opponent's moves in footsies that don't make any sense normally. You can just use Psycho Inferno for the most part as a footsie tool because you're not going to get punished for using it. It's now a footsie button. And here's a good reason why. A large part of how Vega has to defeat the occasional use of this move ends up being very dangerous to do as a generality. Bison is not a character that lets you off lightly for sliding in neutral and failing, for example. Since so much of what you're aiming to do is avoiding getting knocked down, and that involves avoiding getting close enough to worry about being knocked down, you can save yourself a lot of trouble. You don't have to figure out how to anti-air correctly, and you don't have to figure out what is coming next from the Vega side. You just put a wall of fire in front of you and hope for the best. The long animation time of the move, especially in the medium and EX versions, also tends to interrupt a lot of other little things that happen. The EX being a great way to deal with jumps, and save yourself a lot of trouble from the other side as well.
Vega wins.
Bison's other defensive options are so relatively limited against Vega, both in terms of spacing and the fact that Vega can literally move around some of them, that one of your larger aims in this matchup is just to keep on hitting once you've got the option, just so you can get enough meter to use the EX Psycho Inferno when you need to use it. But again, the medium will do. The medium will absolutely do for a lot of positions you end up in. It also helps to create a space where it's easier to use Psycho Axe, simply because the opponent is less likely to move if they think they're going to potentially be flying into flames. Whereas without it, they'll tend to just go, oh yeah, I know you're gonna swing at me, I'm not sure what, but something's coming, so I'm just gonna like flip out or something. The flip itself is actually such a long animation that, again, generally you won't actually get hurt for doing the medium any more than you would get hurt in footsies. It's not that the character can't get around in time to hit you, is that he hits you generally with his standing or crouching medium punch, which is, if you were playing any form of footsies, what you were going to get hit with anyway, because you didn't have any option to reach him.
Vega wins.
But unfortunately, it doesn't look like they did know this or how to use it, and therefore it looked much less fun than it could have. Can I do it in time? Probably not.
Let's do this.
This isn't really a match I tend to have a lot to say about. We basically all have Clawbot, but the mindsets for defeating Claw are very ingrained to personal preference, with the only thing generally being important being knowing all of the options you have for when you hit that player who gets around all of your standard ways of playing. You just need to force people to play a little closer to what you're used to or feel comfortable with. So, while our Clawbot is not really meant to teach you how to fight Claw, how to fight Vega, per se, it teaches you how to counter most of the moves involved. And yes, we had Omni Rabbit test that the V skill, as it is now, at least in one of the versions, does work. But I don't think Cosmic Wolf has spent much time practicing against Clawbot, and unfortunately doesn't have a particularly matching, let's say. The mindset normally played with is not the one that works against this character, because Claw doesn't respect basically anything about close quarters combat if not necessary.
Round 2.
Necalli isn't powerless in this situation though, because being able to use a dive kick lets him hang in the air in a very weird form of chase. Claw does not have the best anti-airs, simply put, and occasionally having those confused by something like a dive kick can really mess things up. He's also not particularly strong against Necalli just forward jumping, especially at close quarters. So you can just jump forward and dive kick, or not dive kick, honestly, as the case may be, instead of dealing with a bunch of stuff that tends to happen at close. This is mostly because the requirement for a lot of what Claw is trying to do involves aiming, and he tends to aim as a character somewhere around the thigh height on most other characters. While he does have little pokes that tend to go toward chest, or I think at least one that goes at head, it's important to realize that the goal of the player can be easily frustrated by just leaving the ground. This in turn causes them to want to do more of that themselves, but Necalli has way more tools to deal with Claw in the air than to deal with Claw on the ground. There you go. And as you can see, in this case, if let's assume those are execution failures, they don't even matter. Because it's a question of, does your opponent have the tools to deal with the situation or not? And the answer in this case is blatantly not. This forces them to play differently, and this pushes them back into a more comfortable place for Cosmic Wolf's style. So adding just one thing is enough to make things shift back, to not have the general frustration of fighting this character on the ground. It's not that the ground fight isn't what will still happen. In fact, it's technically what Cosmic Wolf probably desires, but the form of it is very different. There's more chances to, for example, actually use the skill here, and similar, because your opponent is no longer looking to just keep moving until you can't hit them, because they can't get close enough on you to be sure of what to do either. You can use this even mid-screen, because the fact that Claw has to then watch for whether or not you're going to actually do the dive kick means you can get away with the jumping heavy kick, which is really helpful. It's a very long range move, relatively speaking, to a combination of Necalli's jump, the depth of Necalli's landing in terms of kicks, and moves that can be done right after it. So even if you don't even intend to land the kick, an opponent who needs to move forward but doesn't have a lot of great air-to-air stuff, situation gets reversed on them pretty quickly.
Necalli wins.
This will work even if the player has the V trigger that allows Claw to parry. And the reason it works is 1, the V trigger doesn't last that long, and 2, it's just an additional level of stress. You could easily add
Round
empty
1.
jump into command grab,
Fight.
for example, in the same spaces. More and more layers can easily be added to this, but let's watch carefully at the accuracy that our Vega player gets out of this. That one, for example, could have gone entirely the opposite way had Cosmic Wolf decided, okay, I'm not dive kicking this time, I'm just going to jump straight and try to kick your head. And there's the cross up, which could have led to even bigger damage. One of the things to learn very quickly about Claw players is that they don't like whiffing buttons. I don't know why this is, but definitely at this level, one of the things we've taught from the very beginning is if you think this character is going to keep hitting buttons, the answer is, did they whiff anything? Because they love to bait you if they've hit buttons and try to frustrate you into having like frame traps and timings, but if you can make them whiff anything, it means that Claw has lost control. There's no longer a pushback sequence that is happening. See? Pushback sequence. When the pushback sequence is lost, there's a bit more frustration. And often, given that the character has the reach for it, they'll almost immediately try to get back there. How you use this for yourself is really rather dependent on you and on your character. But you should definitely consider it as a main thing to remember about them. If you do make them whiff anything, the pushback control that they had is gone, and likely, if the player is really good, they'll just retreat immediately, which you're free to do what you want anyway. And if they're in the attack mode and think they can get away with it, they'll hit another button, usually the longest one that will reach. Okay, it doesn't look like they want to change off that character yet, so I have no idea. But we're unlikely to sit around too much, so let's see what happens. Here we are.
Let's do this.
Clawbot training for Kareen mostly covers the same sort of thing. Except that she is a lot more likely to be able to use both a strong anti-air and the air-to-air required to stop aerial movement. And can just about stand up to this character in footsies if you can recognize the pushback. She doesn't have a dive kick to get out of these situations, and while she can use light Rasenha similar to how she does against Birdie in many situations, your opponent would have to be in the mindset of wiggling around. They can't be, oh, you're this far away, so I'm doing this now. One poke. I have no idea. There they are. But there you go. That's one of the situations I'm talking about. If you think your opponent is on the defensive and they're wiggling to try to bait you into the Rasenha, then you obviously can't use it. But if you have any feeling that they're trying to bait you into doing easy things so you can actually lose, then it works out well. It also works well sort of in block strings, let's say. Leading to sequences like that one. This is one of the few characters where Fantasy Dynasty's natural tendency really pays off, because not only does Fa have basically no invincible options that matter to Karine. There are some, but they don't tend to be things Karine cares about. Even now, the backflip. Not even the backflip. For various reasons. It has to do with the way Karine's pressure works compared to other characters. So her tendency to not let up once she has the opportunity to push does help here. Which means that this is probably going to be kind of swingy. It mostly depends on who gets knocked down. And the fact that that anti-air basically is impossible. However, much like Zangief, Karine can in fact anti-air this character, particularly at the ranges that they like to be at, with light Uchinchaku. It only barely works, but you can do it. That said, it's very easy to get caught in playing at Claw's pace.
You lose.
If you don't have very specific options available, and if you're not used to dashing forward or backward to change the rhythm of a match, then you tend to end up playing at Claw's pace the entire time.
Round 1.
So let's see if those help at all. The forward and back dash have a lot of spacing control issues related to them. And as that move is only technically punishable by her stand medium punch, and only sometimes, it's going to be a little harder to deal with because it's not the initial, like, I've learned to punish her this way. It is the sort of thing one has to build up, and it is the sort of thing one has to think about more often, making it harder to do. If you're already being forced into playing at your opponent's pace, having to change one of your default punishes too
Round 2.
is kind of stressful.
Fight.
Fortunately, the Light Uchinchaku also helps block certain other movements because of the way that Claw's movement goes as a general thing. You can think of it more so as a shield in front of her because Claw doesn't actually have any really good instant with punish style attacks. Again, it's similar to Bison's Psycho Inferno. You put a wall in front of you, and the worst that will happen is that you get hit by the same button you were going to get hit with. But at least you're not playing in your opponent's rhythm anymore.
I'll admit that you have some skill.
Final round. Fight.
But the really useful thing is that at the range that Claw likes to jump against Karine, the wall is also the anti-air. Keep on getting caught by the cross-up though, so this is probably not going on too much longer.
You lose. Let's do this.
combination of the different V skill and the aforementioned dive kick might allow the Wolf to do a little bit better than Cosmic Wolf did in a specific aspect, but it's unlikely to lead to the same benefit because the Wolf's style of play doesn't have the same basis. So being able to get the dive kick position is harder. That's the best way to put it. You can already see it happening. The Wolf is more so the type that would be trying to get around what the opponent is doing, whereas Cosmic Wolf is often more so trying to go through it. The difference ends up being that the opponent can reasonably assume that the first thing they need to worry about is the dive kick, and not the buttons. The Wolf therefore will have to convince them buttons are the thing you need to care about in order for the dive kick to start working. This is a thing that comes up a lot in matchup notes in the style that you write them. There's a first thing you do in the matchup, a second thing you do in the matchup, but the first, second, and sometimes third thing gets shuffled around based on the type of player you are. So in this case, learning which buttons to hit to challenge is the first thing the Wolf needs to know. You can use neutral jumps in that situation on many characters, but the reason you would not want to do it as a standard thing is because Claw absolutely can just beat the neutral jump by waiting a little bit and then doing something else. Among the something else's. For the Wolf style, it would be better to just V-reversal out of a lot of these situations. This is partially because using the different V skill means there's a bigger chance of building up meter or changing situations, and it forces more situations in which long blocking gets to happen, since Claw can't be as confident in every type of attack. The result, being able to V-reversal a lot more without having to worry as much. As you can see here, the freedom to just put out the V skill here no longer matters because the meter is already full. We got this far without any V reversals being used, which honestly is kind of difficult to deal with.
Vega wins.
But this is a matter of switching mindset to understanding my most important meter in this matchup is my B meter. It allows me to do the most things. Because obviously you can be baited, you can be thrown, but a lot of the stuff that Claw does ends up by the nature of the character being on screen, so you care a lot less about these things. So the availability of one's V meter, especially the ability to do things with walk downs and similar, or causing your opponent to lose track of themselves, comes up a lot more here. I think the Wolf has been having trouble executing V reversal recently for some reason though. You know how controllers get. So it may be difficult to get much out of this win back. And now it's gone entirely, so let's hope that this is the conversion to win. Unfortunately, once Claw has super in this matchup, you don't have a lot of options for opening Claw up. And that sort of thing tends to happen once your focus slips. One of the big things that matters here, and the good adaptation from NY Godfist, is realizing something that players sometimes have a lot of trouble with. I don't really have pressure to win. You can't beat me neutral, so why am I putting myself at risk of any of these things? The important thing is normally, when making this decision, should you use your V-reversal or not,
Vega wins.
is first of all whether or not it will make you harder for Vega to pin down, and secondly, the chances that the V-reversal will just knock Vega down and give you some advantage off the knockdown. Therefore, one of the strongest against Vega in this scenario is Rainbow Mika, because she will absolutely get this hit and almost always get this knockdown. And one of the relative weakest, I would say, is other Vega, actually.
Let's do this.
Fortunately, I don't think we see the Claw mirror all that often. Fang doesn't do particularly well when doing it either. It isn't just characters that use their reversal to move to the other side. That isn't in itself the problem. The problem comes when that movement doesn't make you any harder to hit, really.
Let my beauty intoxicate you.
But now you'll be able to see probably
Round
the
one.
contrast. Because I doubt NY Godfist is going to play that terribly differently here. But because Cosmic Wolf's wish is different, the flow of the match is very likely to be different. Probably a lot more explosive, to say the least. There's a specific type of patience and delay in movement here, for example, that helps out. So with this type of flow, with these movements, it's a lot more useful than it. You'll notice, for example, that Cosmic Wolf has basically never backdashed, not tried to get out of range really, just blocked and listened out for the right time to do something other than block.
Round two. Fight.
One can also use the V-reversal here, but it's not really necessary if you have confidence in your defense to just block. Then just block. Sometimes you'll get thrown, sometimes you'll get command grabbed, but overall, Nagali does enough damage that you don't have to care about that right off the bat. And the dive kick matters more here because the opponent has to spend more time thinking about how am I supposed to open you up? How can I make you stop blocking in the way I want you to stop blocking? And then they have to measure space a lot more. And of course, measuring space more carefully tends to make your mind shift in that direction and makes it a little bit easier for the other player to suddenly do something you weren't expecting, like jump up and drop back on your head. Or not drop back on your head, as just seen. With the result being that the match is
Vega
much closer,
wins.
and you can't be absolutely sure what any given interaction will be like.
Round one. Fight.
The longest longest poke and the other longest poke. Although I guess we can't do this guy. Another character who has this as a general thing, interestingly, is Lara. Just understand that for some reason, a lot of Claw's normals get caught, like the outstretched limb gets caught by a throw. This happens to Chun-Li as well, and you should often think about it. If you think your opponent is going to hit a button, you can sometimes just command grab, and even though they were so close, sticking the button into the command grab's range, when the command grab would otherwise have completely whiffed, means that they get hit, or rather, get grabbed. As a Claw player, you should generally be careful of this because it's not all that hard to do, honestly. If you get into the tendency of doing certain sequences, you will often find that Lara and Necalli can literally just grab your hand. Necalli must do it differently due to the much longer startup on the command grab, but Necalli's also doing it from a different range to begin with, so it comes up a lot.
Where should I start carving?
Vega wins.
Of course, as you can see by the appearance of Omni Rabbit in the lounge, we're getting close to the end of our stream. In fact, this is likely to be the last on-stream match of the night. The lounge itself could stay open for quite a bit longer, and as you can see, there's 3 spaces today. You are searching, if you want to join it, for 3 rounds first to 2 with characters select off today. I'm not likely to have a whole lot to say about this matchup from this perspective, other than the fact that the Lara thing is a thing, but based on what I've seen from their style of play so far, I don't expect them to be sticking a lot of crouch medium punch with claw to control Lara's movement. From Omni Rabbit's side, this matchup is stressful, but not terribly difficult. This mostly comes down to not doing too much offense of particular types, and not letting Claw get too much meter, because then you get like stuff happening. No idea. But people have been known to move away after hitting things to see what happens. Here we go. The stress, therefore, of this matchup is honestly a matter of preventing oneself from doing a ton of things. Don't hit this, don't hit that, remember not to hit this thing. It's one of the hardest parts of fighting games, really. That character that makes all your stuff that you normally do the wrong thing to do, and leaves you with small gaps in flow that you then have to correct with something else, or teach yourself to just do nothing.
Round 2.
Second rounds are usually where things get dicey, because Claw has meter now. That's basically the only reason. There's a lot more that has to be factored in when you have to worry about all of the various metered options Claw has, and factoring them in means that Claw doesn't necessarily actually have to use the meter. Fortunately for Lara, Claw getting meter oddly means that the V-skill overhead becomes a better idea. Because normally, Claw is playing sort of cautious in this matchup, not trying to get into a lot of trouble one way or the other. But once the meter is available, it's more likely that at least one or two risky things will be done. And those risky things get beaten really hard by Lara's V-skill overhead. Note this is almost always the intention of trading and hoping that your opponent thought of moving in some way. One of Lara's problems in this matchup is that there's nearly nothing to use her meter on. It can be really helpful for surprise supers in some really weird situations, but she really just doesn't have as many uses for meter as one would think, and therefore it doesn't come up too often. Claw players are not the type where you armor through a lot of their normals in neutral and it work out consistently enough to make it a good idea. One semi-useful thing to do with it though is to think of it as whenever Claw has gotten so far away from Lara as to be annoying and any chase needs to happen, just immediately throw out EX Clap. It's quick enough to prevent most problems, can be walked behind, and unlike trying to get out regular Clap in any close range situation whatsoever, it's much more useful. You only really need to keep one meter bar around for doing that combo as just been described, so you can prevent a lot of these long range situations where you end up walking forward. Just don't walk forward, just throw out Clap and wait. This is particularly more useful when, as you can see, Claw is not using the Rose as the trigger, because then there's really little or no threat to doing this. You can do it basically on reaction to Claw backdashes, and it will help in certain ways at that point, but you can't be sure because after backdash is a good timing to come back in immediately, so. You can see, for example, that a use of PX Clap there could have led to something much bigger. It wouldn't necessarily. In fact, it'd probably just make your opponent more cautious. But cautious is sometimes what you want. This is another skill you can learn from Clawbot fairly easily. In fact, it's important enough to learn that it's one of the main focuses of it, even though we don't have a good way to explain that.
Lara wins.
But with that flow, we have reached the end of our stream for tonight. Join us tomorrow. I expect we're going to be having Guilty Gear, but you can tell by checking out our Twitter 2_MK_FGC at around 7 Eastern to find out. Other than that, our bots you can find at 2-mk.org. And you can join us on Thursday for Dead or Alive, our 60 Times Lounge. But this has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night everyone.